I didn't believe in coincidences. At least, not before the letter arrived. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind that smelled like burnt coffee and printer ink. I was standing by the window of my office, watching rain slide down the glass in uneven lines, when my assistant knocked and placed an envelope on my desk without a word. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind people use when they want to be taken seriously. My name was written in elegant handwriting I didn't recognize. I opened it without thinking much of it. By the second paragraph, my coffee had gone cold. I had inherited property. Not money, not shares. A place. A lakeside residence in the north of the country, surrounded by forest, complete with several hectares of land and a fully staffed estate. The owner, a woman named Eleanor Whitmore, had passed away 3 months earlier. According to the letter, she had been my great-aunt. I read that sentence 3 times. I had never heard of Eleanor Whitmore. My family was small, practical, and painfully transparent. There were no mysterious relatives, no secret branches in our family tree. Or so I thought. My grandmother had died when I was a teenager, taking most of her stories with her. My parents never spoke about the past unless it involved bills or responsibilities. And yet here it was. A lawyer's signature at the bottom. A phone number. An address. I should have laughed and thrown the letter away. Instead, I felt something twist inside my chest. Curiosity, sharp and inconvenient. I called the number that same day. The lawyer, Mr. Hale, spoke in a calm, almost bored tone, as if he explained inheritances to strangers every morning before breakfast. He confirmed everything. Yes, the estate was real. Yes, I was the sole heir. No, there were no closer relatives. And yes, there was a condition. All current employees were to remain in their positions. You're not required to live there permanently, he said, as if reading my thoughts. But you do need to take formal ownership within 30 days. Otherwise, the property will be transferred to a private foundation. I asked the obvious question, why me? There was a pause on the line. A pause just long enough to make me uncomfortable. Ms. Whitmore was very specific, he said finally. She believed you were the only person who could decide the fate of the estate fairly. I hung up feeling like I had been handed someone else's unfinished life. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept circling the same questions. Who was Eleanor Whitmore? Why had she chosen me? And why did the idea of that house, isolated, silent, waiting, feel less like a gift and more like an invitation? 3 days later, I was on a train heading north. The city slowly dissolved into gray fields and bare trees. The farther we traveled, the quieter the world became. By the time I stepped off at the final station, there were only 4 passengers left, and none of them looked like tourists. A man was waiting for me at the platform. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat that looked too elegant for such a remote place. You must be Claire, he said. I nodded, surprised he knew my name. I'm Thomas, he continued. I oversee the estate. We drove in silence for almost 40 minutes. The road wound through forest and hills, the lake appearing suddenly between trees like a sheet of steel. When the house finally came into view, my breath caught. It was not beautiful in the way glossy magazines define beauty. It was imposing. Stone walls, tall windows, a long terrace overlooking the water. The house stood as if it had grown out of the land itself, ancient and patient. It didn't look abandoned. It looked alert, as if it knew I was coming. Inside, everything was immaculate. No dust, no dica. The air smelled faintly of wood and herbs. Several people stood in the entrance hall when we arrived. A housekeeper, a groundskeeper, a cook, and a woman who introduced herself as the caretaker of the library. They looked at me with something that wasn't exactly warmth. More like expectation. Dinner was served in a room far too large for one person. Silverware gleamed under soft light. I felt absurd in my simple coat and boots, like I had wandered onto a film set unprepared. That night, in the guest bedroom, I lay awake listening to the house breathe. The wind rattled the windows. The lake murmured somewhere below. At some point, I heard footsteps in the corridor outside my door, slow, deliberate, unhurried. I told myself it was just the staff. Still, I locked the door. Sometime before dawn, I woke with the strange sensation that I was not alone. The room was dark, but I could swear someone was standing near the window. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. When morning came, pale and cold, I laughed at myself for being dramatic. I told myself I was tired, overwhelmed, projecting meaning where there was none. But as I dressed, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The chair by the window had been moved. I was certain of it. And for the first time since receiving that letter, I wondered whether Eleanor Whitmore had truly left this house at all. I didn't mention the chair to anyone. At breakfast, I sat at the long oak table while the cook, a woman named Margaret with kind eyes and quick hands, placed a plate of eggs and toast in front of me. She smiled as if nothing in this house could ever be wrong. The others moved quietly around the room, efficient and almost invisible. Thomas stood near the window, hands folded behind his back, watching the lake like it might answer a question he hadn't yet asked. "Did you sleep well?" he said without turning. "Well enough," I replied, lying more easily than I expected. I studied him from across the table. There was something restrained about the way he carried himself, as if he were always holding back words. He looked too young to have spent his life managing an estate like this, yet too composed to be merely an employee. When I asked him how long he had worked here, he paused before answering. "Long enough to know the house," he said, "and its habits." That word again. Habits. After breakfast, Thomas offered to show me the grounds. I welcomed the excuse to be outside. The air near the lake was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of damp leaves and stone. The path curved along the water, then disappeared into the forest. Everything was maintained with care, yet nothing felt modern.
No benches.
No signs. Just land and silence. "Ms. Whitmore liked things untouched," Thomas said, as if reading my thoughts. "She believed the land should remain as it was." "You knew her well?" I asked. He hesitated. "I knew her rules." We walked in silence for a while. I tried not to think about the way the house seemed to watch us from the hill, its windows dark and unreadable in the morning light. By midday, I retreated to the library. It was my favorite room so far. High ceilings, shelves that climbed the walls, a faint smell of old paper and smoke. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted lazily in the air. I ran my fingers along the spines of books, most of them untouched for decades. Journals, ledgers, travel diaries. Eleanor Whitmore had documented her life meticulously, yet strangely, there were gaps. Entire years missing. Pages torn out with deliberate care. I sat at the large desk near the fireplace and opened a thin leather-bound notebook. Inside were sketches of the house, not architectural plans, but impressions. Shadows. Angles.
Corridors drawn attåt perspectives.
Notes in the margins spoke of sound, movement, and unseen spaces. My pulse quickened. I closed the notebook when I heard the door behind me. "I didn't mean to startle you," a man said. I turned sharply. He stood just inside the doorway, one hand resting casually on the frame. He was about my age, maybe a little older. Dark hair, slightly disheveled, as if he hadn't bothered to tame it. His eyes were striking, not in color, but in intensity. Curious. Watchful. "I don't believe we've met," I said. "No," he agreed, smiling faintly. "We haven't. I'm Daniel." "And you are?" "A local," he said easily. "I help out when needed." Something about the answer irritated me. It was too vague. "I didn't know the house required extra help," I said. His smile deepened, but there was something guarded beneath it. It always does. He stepped further inside, glancing around the library as if greeting an old friend. I noticed how comfortable he looked here. Too comfortable. "You must be the heir," he continued. "I was wondering when you'd arrive." I bristled. "Is that so?"
Yes.
Everyone was. I stood, suddenly aware of how alone I was in that vast room. Do you make a habit of wandering into private rooms unannounced? Only when the doors are open, he replied calmly. And only when I'm invited. I didn't invite you. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Fair enough. When he turned to leave, something compelled me to speak. Daniel, I said. How well did you know Eleanor Whitmore?
He stopped.
His shoulders tensed just slightly. Well enough, he said quietly, to know she didn't choose you by accident. Before I could ask what he meant, he was gone. That evening, the house felt different. Heavier. I ate dinner alone again. Thomas was polite, but distant. Margaret avoided my eyes. It was as if an unspoken agreement had settled over the staff. Something had shifted, and I was not meant to understand it yet. After dinner, I decided to explore. The corridors twisted more than I remembered. Some hallways seemed longer at night, others shorter. I passed doors I was certain hadn't been there before. When I reached the second floor, I noticed a faint draft, cool against my skin. One of the windows was open. I knew I hadn't opened it. The lake reflected moonlight like broken glass. The wind carried a whisper of sound, not words, but something close to breath. Hello. I called softly. No answer. I turned away, my heart pounding, and nearly collided with someone behind me. Daniel steadied me by the shoulders. Careful, he said quietly. The house doesn't like sudden movements. I pulled away, anger flaring. Stop saying things like that. This is a house, not a living creature. He studied my face, then sighed. That's what Eleanor said at first, too. Why are you here? I demanded. Really? His expression softened. Because I promised I would be. To whom? To her, he said. And now, apparently, to you. Before I could respond, a distant sound echoed through the corridor, a low, deliberate creak, like a door opening where no door should be. Daniel's gaze snapped toward the sound. You shouldn't be wandering alone, he said urgently. Not yet. What do you mean, not yet? But he was already guiding me back toward my room, his hand firm but gentle at my elbow. When we reached my door, he stopped. You can still leave, he said quietly, before you start asking the wrong questions. And if I don't? His eyes met mine, dark and unreadable. Then the house will start answering. That night, I didn't lock my door. I wasn't sure it would matter. I dreamed of corridors that folded into themselves. In the dream, I was walking barefoot across cold stone floors, following the echo of my own footsteps. Every door I opened led back to the same room, the library, but each time it was slightly different. The shelves leaned at odd angles. The fireplace was lit, then dark. Sometimes there was someone standing by the window, their outline blurred, their face hidden in shadow. When I woke, my heart was racing. Morning light filtered through the curtains, pale and cautious, as if even the sun was unsure whether it was welcome here. For a long moment, I lay still listening.
No footsteps. No whispers.
Just the distant sound of water moving against the shore. I dressed quickly and went downstairs. Breakfast was quieter than the day before. Margaret placed a cup of tea in front of me and squeezed my hand briefly, as if an apology for something she hadn't done. Thomas was nowhere to be seen. Where's Thomas? I asked. Margaret exchanged a glance with the groundskeeper, then smiled too quickly. He had errands in town.
Of course he did.
After breakfast, I decided to stop pretending I was a guest. This house was mine now, whether I wanted it or not. I returned to the library and pulled Eleanor Whitmore's notebooks from the shelf again. I forced myself to slow down, to read not as someone looking for a mystery, but as a woman trying to understand another woman's life. The early entries were ordinary. Observations about the weather, notes on repairs, lists of books she wanted to acquire. Then gradually the tone changed. She began writing about sound. Not noises, sound. The house remembers. One entry read, "It answers when spoken to correctly." Another, "There are rooms that do not exist until you need them." I closed the notebook, my fingers trembling. That was when I noticed the shelf behind the desk. One of the books was fake. It was heavier than the others and didn't slide out easily. When I tugged harder, the entire section of the shelf shifted with a muted click. A narrow gap opened, revealing a passage just wide enough for one person. My first instinct was to call for help. My second was to step inside. The air in the passage was cool and dry, untouched by dust. Someone had been here recently. The corridor sloped gently upward, lit by small recessed lamps hidden along the wall. Whoever had built this hadn't intended it to feel secret. They had intended it to feel natural. The passage opened into a small room. A sitting room by the looks of it. A sofa. A low table. A fireplace that had been used recently. And an armchair positioned directly beneath a narrow window overlooking the lake. Someone stood by the window. Daniel turned slowly when he heard me. "I was hoping you'd find this," he said. I didn't move. "Get away from the window." He complied immediately, raising his hands in mock surrender. "You're angry. You've been living here," I said. "Haven't you?" "Yes." "In secret?" "Yes." "In my house." He smiled faintly. "That part is new." I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear because my instincts had been right. Relief because the truth was at least human-shaped. "How long?" I asked. "Since before Eleanor died," he replied. "With her permission." I laughed, sharp and humorless. "Of course." "She knew she was dying," he continued. "She didn't want the house empty." "Not completely." "And you agreed to just stay?" "I owed her," he said simply. I crossed my arms, trying to steady myself. "You've been following me." "Yes." "Watching me." "Yes." "Kissing me in the dark," I added coldly. He flinched. "That wasn't part of the plan," he said quietly. Silence stretched between us. "You terrified me," I said finally. "I know. Why didn't you tell me who you were?" "Because if I had," he said, meeting my eyes, "you would have left." I hated that he was right. I sank onto the edge of the sofa, suddenly exhausted. "You manipulated everything. The noises, the open windows, the timing." "Yes," he admitted. At first." "At first?" He hesitated. "After a while, the house didn't need my help." That sent a chill down my spine. "Don't say things like that." "I'm serious," he said. "Some nights I stayed here and didn't move, and things still happened." I stood abruptly. "I want the truth. All of it." He nodded. "Then we should talk somewhere less theatrical." We returned to the main part of the house together, the hidden passage closing behind us as seamlessly as it had opened. Daniel explained as we walked. Eleanor Whitmore had been his guardian, not by blood, but by choice. She had taken him in as a teenager after his mother died. He never called her aunt or mother, only Eleanor. She taught him to listen, to observe, to understand the rhythms of the house. She believed the house chose its people, he said, not the other way around. "And it chose me?" I asked bitterly. "Yes." We stopped in the entrance hall. "She believed you would either save it," he said, "or finally let it rest." I stared at the front door, at the world beyond it that suddenly felt very far away. "And what do you want?" He didn't answer right away. "I wanted you to leave," he said finally, "before I met you. And now, he said softly, "I don't know how to exist in this place without you." That should have frightened me. Instead, it felt like recognition. That night, I locked my door again. Not because I was afraid of Daniel, but because I was afraid of myself. I avoided Daniel for 2 days. Not intentionally, at first. I told myself I needed space, time to think, to separate the strange intimacy we had developed from the reality of what he had done. But by the second day, it was clear I was hiding. I took my meals in my room, walked the grounds only when I was sure he wasn't nearby, and buried myself in Eleanor's notebooks as if they might offer instructions on how to behave. They didn't. Instead, they offered questions. Eleanor wrote often about choice. about moments when the future narrowed to a single decision that felt insignificant at the time, but proved otherwise in retrospect. She never named Daniel directly, but he appeared in the margins, initials, sketches, references to the boy, and later, the man who listens. On the third morning, Thomas knocked on my door.
She wants to see you, he said. Who?
I asked, though I already knew. The house, he replied, then corrected himself. Daniel. I followed him down to the conservatory. The room was filled with light and greenery, glass walls blurring the boundary between inside and out. Daniel stood near the far end, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the lake. I'm not staying, I said before he could speak. He turned slowly. I know. I'll sign the papers, I continued. I'll keep the staff. I'll maintain the property. But I won't live here. That's fair, he said quietly. The ease of his acceptance unsettled me more than resistance would have. You're not even going to argue?
No, he said.
Eleanor believed forcing people to stay was the quickest way to lose them. Then why all the secrecy? I demanded. Why the games?
He winced.
Because I was afraid. Of what? Of you, he said honestly. Of what you might see if I was honest from the beginning. I paced the length of the room, the glass echoing softly beneath my steps. You let me think I was losing my mind. I never wanted to frighten you, he said. At first, it was meant to be harmless. Enough discomfort to make you question whether this place was worth keeping. And then I watched you stay, he said. Even when you were afraid. Even when you didn't understand. I stopped walking. That changed things. I turned to face him. You don't get to decide what changes things for me. No, he agreed. I don't. We stood there in silence. Outside, the lake was unnaturally still. I'll be leaving in 3 days, I said. After the paperwork is done. Daniel nodded once. Then I'll leave too. That surprised me. Where will you go? Somewhere the house doesn't follow me, he said with a faint smile. That night, the house was restless. Doors creaked without reason. The wind howled through corridors that had been silent before. I woke repeatedly, each time with the sense that something was waiting just beyond my awareness. At some point past midnight, I gave up on sleep and went to the library. The fire was lit. I froze. Daniel stood by the fireplace, adding a log. I didn't hear you come in, I said. You weren't meant to, he replied. I crossed my arms, suddenly aware of how thin my robe was, how close we were standing. You said you'd leave. I will, he said. But not tonight. I should have walked away. Instead, I sat down. He poured me a glass of wine without asking. The familiarity of the gesture sent an unexpected wave of warmth through me. I read more of her journals, I said quietly. Eleanor was afraid of dying alone. Yes, he said. That terrified her more than death itself. Is that why she kept you here? Yes. And why she chose me? He hesitated. She thought you would understand. Understand what? What it means to build a life alone, he said. And still choose to open the door. The words hit closer to home than I liked. The storm began suddenly. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the windows. The lights flickered, then went out completely. I sucked in a sharp breath. Daniel was beside me instantly. It's all right, he said. The generator will kick in. It didn't. The darkness pressed in around us, thick and intimate. I could feel him without seeing him. The warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing. I don't like this, I whispered. I know, he said softly. The thunder rolled again, closer this time. I flinched. Without thinking, I reached for him. He froze under my touch. Tell me to stop, he said quietly. I didn't. He wrapped his arms around me slowly, carefully, as if giving me time to pull away. I didn't. My forehead rested against his chest, my fingers clutching the fabric of his shirt. The house seemed to exhale. I don't want to be afraid anymore, I said. Then don't be, he replied, his voice low. Not here. Not with me. His hand brushed my hair, tentative at first, then firmer when I leaned into the touch. The kiss came naturally, unhurried, charged with everything we hadn't said. It wasn't desperate. It was inevitable. When the lights finally flickered back on, I was in his arms, and the world felt quieter, as if something long unsettled had finally been acknowledged. I pulled back first. "This doesn't change my decision," I said. "I know," he replied. "But it changes something," I added. He smiled softly. "Yes." That night, I slept without dreams. And in the morning, the chair by the window was exactly where I had left it. The morning after the storm felt deceptively ordinary. Sunlight spilled across the lake, turning the water pale blue, almost gentle. Birds gathered along the terrace railing as if nothing unusual had ever happened here, as if the house had not breathed differently in the dark, as if I had not fallen asleep wrapped in a man I still didn't fully trust. Daniel was already gone when I woke. The other side of the bed was cool, the pillow untouched, as though the night itself had quietly erased him. For a brief, irrational moment, I wondered whether I had imagined everything. But then I noticed the faint scent of smoke and wine lingering in the room, and the way my chest tightened when I realized I wanted to see him again. I hated that. After dressing, I went downstairs. The house was calm, almost restrained, like an animal pretending it hadn't shown its teeth the night before. Margaret hummed softly in the kitchen. Thomas was reading near the window, his glasses perched low on his nose. "Good morning," he said, studying me over the rim of his cup.
"Good morning," I replied.
He didn't ask how I slept. Instead, he said, "The lawyer will arrive tomorrow." I nodded. "I know. And after that?" "I leave," I said, more firmly than I felt. Thomas watched me for a moment, then nodded. "As you wish." The day passed slowly. I walked the grounds alone, letting the cold air steady my thoughts. I tried to imagine the estate as a responsibility rather than a presence.
Land,
Stone,
roof,
staff salaries, maintenance costs. If I reduced it to numbers and tasks, maybe it would lose its hold on me. It didn't. That afternoon, I found Daniel in the boathouse. He stood with his back to me, sleeves rolled up, repairing a cracked oar. He looked less mysterious here, more real, a man with rough hands and focused movements. The sight softened something inside me before I could stop it. "You're good at disappearing," I said. He glanced over his shoulder. "So are you." I crossed my arms. "We need to talk." "Yes," he agreed calmly. "We do." I leaned against a wooden beam. "Last night wasn't part of your plan, was it?" "No," he said without hesitation. "And now?" He set the oar aside and turned to face me fully. "Now I don't have a plan." That should have worried me. "I'm leaving in 2 days," I reminded him. "I know. And you said you'd leave too." "Yes." I searched his face for resistance, for persuasion, for anything. There was none. "That's it?" I asked. "You're just going to let me go?"
He studied me quietly.
"If I tried to stop you, you'd resent me. If I tried to convince you, you'd doubt yourself. Eleanor taught me that." "And what did she teach you about wanting someone?" I asked softly.
His jaw tightened.
"That wanting isn't the same as owning." The words landed heavily between us. I turned away, suddenly unsure what I had hoped to hear. "Then we're clear." "Yes," he said. But we weren't. That night, I dreamed again. This time, I stood in the entrance hall, watching myself walk through the front door with a suitcase. The house didn't stop me. It didn't resist. It simply closed its doors behind me and went dark. I woke with a sharp sense of loss. On my final day, I packed slowly, deliberately. I wanted to remember the weight of the rooms, the way sound traveled here, the particular silence that settled at dusk. I took one last walk through the library, brushing my fingers over Eleanor's books. "You chose poorly," I whispered to her. "Or maybe you chose exactly right." The lawyer arrived in the early afternoon. Papers were signed. Accounts discussed. Instructions given. I felt strangely detached, as if I were watching someone else make decisions in my place. When it was done, Thomas shook my hand. Margaret hugged me tightly, her eyes shining. Daniel didn't come. I told myself that was for the best. The car waited at the front drive. I placed my bag in the back, took one last look at the house, and felt something twist painfully in my chest. As I turned to get in, I heard footsteps. Daniel stopped a few feet away, breathing hard, as if he had run. "I didn't want you to leave without this," he said, holding out a small object.
It was a key.
"Eleanor's," he explained, "to the West Wing. She never finished restoring it."
"I don't need it," I said.
"You might," he replied. "Someday." I hesitated, then took it. "Goodbye, Claire," he said. "Goodbye, Daniel." The car pulled away. The house receded into the distance, its shape blurring among the trees. I told myself it was over. 2 weeks later, back in the city, life resumed its relentless pace. Meetings, emails, deadlines,
Noise.
I threw myself into work, determined not to think about lakes or secret rooms or men who lived between shadows and truth. It almost worked, until the letter arrived. No return address. Thick paper.
Familiar handwriting.
Inside was a single sentence. "The West Wing is changing. You should come." I stared at the words until my vision blurred. Some places, I realized, don't let you leave just because you walk away. And some choices only reveal themselves after you've already made them. I didn't go back immediately. I read the letter again and again, as if repetition might change its meaning. "The West Wing is changing. You should come."
No explanation. No signature.
I knew who had written it, and I hated how quickly my body responded. The familiar tightening in my chest, the quiet pull that had never fully loosened. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer, beneath contracts and invoices, pretending it belonged to the same world. For 3 days, I succeeded. On the 4th night, I dreamed of the house again. This time, I stood at the edge of the lake, the water perfectly still. The house loomed behind me, silent but attentive. Somewhere above, a window opened. I didn't turn around, but I knew who was there. "Claire," a voice said, not aloud but inside me. I woke with my heart racing. By morning, I had booked a ticket. The drive north felt different this time. Less uncertain, more deliberate. As if I were returning to something unfinished rather than stepping into the unknown. When the house came into view, I felt the same familiar tightening, but beneath it was something else. Relief. Thomas met me at the gate, surprise flickering briefly across his face before he masked it with composure. "You came," he said. "I received a letter," I replied. "I assume that's why." He nodded. "Daniel thought you might." "Where is he?" I asked. "West Wing," Thomas said simply. The wing had been closed during my previous stay, sealed off behind heavy doors I had assumed were structural, not intentional. Now they stood open. The air inside was colder. Dust hung in the air, disturbed recently. Light filtered through tall, narrow windows, illuminating walls stripped down to bare stone. Daniel stood in the center of the long corridor, sleeves rolled up, paint streaked across his hands. He looked up when he heard me. "You came," he said softly. "I told you I would," I replied, though I hadn't. He smiled faintly, then stepped aside. "I wanted you to see this before it was finished." The West Wing felt different from the rest of the house, less controlled, less restrained. As if this part had been waiting longer. "What's changing?" I asked. Daniel gestured toward an open doorway. Inside was a room unlike any I had seen before. The walls were lined with unfinished shelves. The windows were larger, opening fully toward the lake. The fireplace had been restored, its stone cleaned, its shape elegant and simple. The room felt lighter. "This was Eleanor's last project," Daniel said. "She wanted it to become something new." "For what?" I asked. "For whoever came next," he replied, meeting my gaze. "For you." I swallowed. "You shouldn't assume that." "I don't," he said. "But I hope." We stood in silence, the lake glimmering beyond the glass. I didn't write the letter to trap you, he said finally. I wrote it because the house started doing things again. What kind of things? I asked. Doors opening. Drafts where there shouldn't be any. Rooms shifting.
He paused.
Not violently. Almost expectantly. I folded my arms. You're saying the house noticed I was gone? Yes. And that's supposed to convince me to stay?
No, he said.
It's supposed to explain why I couldn't leave either. That surprised me. You didn't leave? I tried, he admitted. I made it as far as the city. 2 days. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't sleep. Every thought came back here. To the house, I said. To you, he corrected. I turned away, suddenly overwhelmed. You don't get to say things like that and expect me to know what to do with them. I know, he said quietly. That's why I didn't say them before. That evening, we ate together for the first time since my return. Margaret pretended not to notice the shift in the air. Thomas watched us carefully, as if weighing something. After dinner, Daniel and I walked along the lake. Why did Eleanor really choose me? I asked. He stopped, facing the water. Because you weren't afraid of being alone. But you weren't resigned to it either. I thought of my life in the city, full, busy, controlled, carefully built to avoid reliance. She believed you would understand the cost of staying, he continued. And the cost of leaving. And what do you believe? I asked.
He turned to me.
I believe you deserve the choice. The wind picked up, rippling the water. I'm not staying, I said quietly. I know, but I'm not selling either, I added. Not yet. He nodded. That's enough. That night, I slept in the West Wing. The room was unfinished, the bed temporary, the walls bare. But for the first time, the house felt quiet. Not watchful. Resting. In the early hours of the morning, I woke to the sound of soft footsteps. Daniel stood in the doorway, hesitating. I just wanted to check on you, he said.
Ai fine, he replied.
He didn't move. Daniel, I said gently. If you step closer, everything will change. He met my eyes. I know. He stayed where he was. That restraint did more to unravel me than any touch could have. As dawn broke over the lake, I realized something unsettling and undeniable. The house wasn't asking me to stay forever. It was asking me to choose without fear. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure which answer frightened me more. I stayed. Not because the house asked me to, and not because Daniel wanted me to. I stayed because every time I tried to imagine leaving again, the future blurred, while staying sharpened into focus. It wasn't romantic or dramatic. It was quieter than that, a slow, steady realization that some questions cannot be answered from a distance. I extended my leave in the city, told myself it was temporary. Daniel didn't comment. For the first few days, we moved carefully around each other, like people learning a new language. We shared meals, walked the grounds, spoke about practical things, repairs, staff schedules, the West Wing's progress. We avoided talking about us. It didn't last. One evening, while we were cataloging books in the library, I caught him watching me. Say it, I said without looking up. Say what? Whatever you're not saying. He closed the book in his hands and leaned against the table. I'm trying not to pressure you. I didn't ask you to be silent, I replied. He studied me for a moment, then spoke. You've changed the house. I laughed softly. I haven't touched anything. You've changed how it behaves, he said. Doors don't open at night anymore. The drafts have stopped. The West Wing feels settled. I set my book aside. You really believe this place responds to people? I've lived here long enough to know when it's restless, he said. And when it isn't. And now? I asked. Now it's waiting, he said. Just like you. That night, we didn't pretend anymore. We stood in the doorway of the West Wing, the lake glowing faintly beyond the windows. There was no thunder, no darkness, no drama. Just the quiet weight of a moment neither of us wanted to avoid. I don't want half of you, I said. You'll never have half, he replied. I don't want secrets. Then ask, he said. I stepped closer. If I choose to stay, what happens to you? He didn't hesitate. I stay too. Openly. And if I leave? He exhaled slowly. Then I let you go. The honesty in his voice undid me. I reached for him first. The kiss was different from before, slower, deeper, grounded in choice rather than fear or confusion. When his arms closed around me, it felt less like surrender and more like alignment. Later, lying together in the unfinished room, I traced the line of his shoulder and thought about how easy it would be to lose myself here, and how hard I would have fought it once. In the morning, I found Eleanor's final notebook. It had been hidden in the West Wing, tucked behind a loose stone near the fireplace. The pages were sparse, her handwriting shakier, but her thoughts clearer than ever. Some houses are built to last, she wrote. Others are built to wait. I read the notebook aloud to Daniel as he worked nearby. He listened without interrupting. She knew, I said quietly. Yes, he agreed. That she was leaving things unfinished. Yes. And she was all right with that. Yes. The realization settled over me gently. That afternoon, I called my office in the city. I delegated more than I ever had before, shifted responsibilities, created space where there had always been pressure. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not with fear, but with relief. Daniel watched me carefully. You don't have to give anything up. I know, I said. I'm choosing to rearrange. That evening, we hosted the staff for dinner. Not a formal affair. Just a long table, good food, laughter that felt unfamiliar but welcome. Thomas raised his glass.
To clarity, he said.
Margaret smiled at me like she'd been waiting years for this moment. Later, when the house had settled into sleep, Daniel and I walked the corridors together. The hidden passages no longer felt like secrets, just alternative paths. I used to think this place trapped people, I admitted. And now, he asked. Now I think it reveals them. He stopped, turning to face me. And what has it revealed about you? I considered the question. That I'm braver than I thought, and more afraid than I admitted. He smiled softly. That's a good place to start. That night, the house was silent.
No creaks. No whispers.
No restless movement. Just the steady rhythm of two people breathing in sync. In the morning, I stood at the window of the West Wing and watched the lake shimmer under the rising sun. I didn't feel owned. I didn't feel trapped. I felt present. But one question remained. A choice I had been circling without naming. I turned to Daniel. If I stay, I said slowly, I won't just manage this place. I'll change it. He nodded. I expect you would. And you'll have to accept that, I continued. No more waiting. No more hiding. He met my gaze, steady and sure. Then it's time. For what? I asked. For the house, he said. And for us. As the light filled the room, I understood something Eleanor had written, but never explained. Some inheritances are not meant to be kept as they are. They are meant to be finished. I signed the final documents on a clear morning that smelled of frost and lake water.
There was no ceremony.
No witnesses beyond Thomas, who stood quietly by the window, and Daniel, who leaned against the wall with an expression that was both attentive and deliberately neutral. The papers felt lighter than I expected, as if the decision had already been made somewhere deeper than my hands. When it was done, I set the pen aside and exhaled. That's it, I said. Thomas nodded once. Then it's official. Nothing thundered.
No door slammed.
The house didn't react at all. And somehow that felt right. The changes didn't happen all at once. They never do. It started with light. I ordered the West Wing windows fully restored, not replaced but opened, literally and figuratively. Curtains were removed. Walls were cleaned, not repainted. I wanted the stone to show, the age to remain visible. This place didn't need to pretend it was young. Daniel watched the process with careful interest, never interfering unless I asked. When I did, his suggestions were precise, thoughtful, rooted in respect rather than nostalgia. "You're not afraid of losing what it was," he said one afternoon as we stood in the half-finished West Wing.
No, Iraplia.
"I'm afraid of freezing it in time." That seemed to please him. The staff adapted quickly. Margaret flourished under fewer rules. Thomas became something closer to a partner than a caretaker. Laughter began to appear where silence once dominated. The house didn't resist it. If anything, it welcomed it. Daniel and I didn't announce anything. There was no declaration, no defining conversation about what we were. We moved forward the way people do, when certainty doesn't need defending, steadily, without drama. Some nights we talked for hours. Other nights we worked side by side in silence. Occasionally, we argued about design, about boundaries, about how much of the past deserved preservation. Those arguments never lingered. They clarified rather than divided. One evening, as winter deepened, we found ourselves in the old sitting room, the first secret room I had discovered. The fire was lit, casting soft light across the walls. "This room used to feel like a hiding place," I said. "And now?" Daniel asked. "Now it feels like a beginning." He smiled. Eleanor would have liked that. I thought of her often, not as a ghost or presence, but as a woman who had lived fiercely, imperfectly, and deliberately. She had made mistakes. She had loved poorly at times. But she had understood something essential. You don't control what you leave behind. You prepare it. Spring arrived quietly. The lake thawed. The ground softened. I began splitting my time between the city and the estate, no longer torn between them. My life adjusted around the truth rather than resisting it. One afternoon, standing on the terrace, Daniel said, "You know you don't need to keep proving you belong here." "I know," I said. "I just like choosing it." He reached for my hand, and for the first time, there was no hesitation on either side. The house had stopped watching. It didn't need to anymore. The final transformation came unexpectedly. I was in the library late one evening, sorting Eleanor's notebooks into categories: finished, unfinished, personal. I found one last envelope tucked inside the cover of her final journal. It was addressed simply, "To whoever stays." Inside was a single page. "I built walls when I should have built doors," she wrote. "If you are reading this, then you were braver than I was at the end. Do not preserve my fears. Preserve my love." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back on the shelf. That night, I told Daniel everything. When I finished, he said nothing for a long moment. Then he stood, crossed the room, and kissed my forehead, not as a lover, but as someone offering trust. "You stayed," he said softly. "Yes," I replied. "And this time I know why." We stood at the window together, watching moonlight ripple across the lake. Somewhere in the house, a door closed gently, not on its own, but because someone had chosen to close it. Months later, when people asked me why I had kept the estate, I gave different answers. Sometimes I spoke of responsibility, sometimes of heritage, sometimes of opportunity. The truth was simpler. I had been invited into a story that wasn't finished yet, and I had chosen not to walk away. On a quiet evening, as summer approached again, Daniel and I sat on the terrace with a bottle of wine, the house glowing softly behind us. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd left?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. "No," I said. "I wonder what would have happened if I'd been too afraid to come back." He nodded, satisfied. The lake was calm. The house was silent. And for the first time in my life, so was the part of me that had always been waiting for something else. Not because I had found the end, but because I had finally chosen the middle, the living, uncertain, beautiful middle where things are built, not inherited. And that, I realized, was the greatest legacy of all.